Hi everyone, good afternoon, good morning, good evening, wherever you are in the world. Thank you once again for your time and welcome to another session of Strikey in Conversation. And today, the guest that we have is none other than Dr. Richard Harris. So today's topic, we will be talking about Against All Odds with Dr. Richard Harris. Of course, we're going to talk about the Thai cave rescue and also his latest book, which is called Against All Odds. So just to give a very brief backstory of who is David Strike or Strikey. I'm sure you guys know that David Strike is, of course, an author and also ADEX ambassador for technical diving all throughout the years. And he has came out with some of the best books for divers, especially, I will highlight it later on, and also some of the best sessions that we have, especially with conferences. And of course, our guest today is none other than Dr. Richard Harris from Australia. Dr. Richard is an anaesthetist, a cave diver, and he's also a recipient of Star of Courage, the Order of Australia Medal, OAM, the 2019 Explorers Club President's Medal for Heroism, the 2018 PADI Medal of Valour, and also co-recipient of Australian of the Year 2019. Dr. Richard, or otherwise known as Harry, has been in the line and industry of anesthesia and also aeromedical retrieval medicine in Adelaide or South Australia, a technical diver and also an underwater photographer who at an early stage embraced rebreather technology to explore and photograph caves in Australia and overseas. He has taken part in numerous expeditions with colleagues to explore subterranean environments, including the Pierce Resurgence in New Zealand to 229 meters depth, Desting Spring in China to 213 meters, and Sompong Cave in Thailand to 196 meters. With an active interest in diving safety and accident investigation, especially pertaining to cave and technical diving, his professional life in the field of anesthesia, diving, and retrieval medicine combined nicely with his interest in wilderness and also expedition medicine. Playing a very huge and key role in developing a cave and sump rescue capability in Australia, Harry's crucial role in the 2018 Tham Luang Cave rescue in Thailand, which is dramatically detailed in his latest book called Against All Odds, where he co-authored with his colleague Craig Challant, if I got his name right, my apologies, earned enormous international recognition and numerous prestigious awards that included all the recipients and mentions that I had said earlier. Herewith, without any further ado, I'm sure most of us are excited to hear this conversation as I do every week. Over to you, David.
Nora, thank you. Richard and I were talking just before we came on air, and as I pointed out, the elephant in the room is, of course, the cave rescue. But there's many other facets to Richard Harris that I find absolutely fascinating. We started talking because I seem to recall some years ago I had a newspaper cutting with regard to some people being lost at sea in South Australia, and one of them turned out to be Harry. So, Harry, tell us all about that. When did that happen?
Evening, Strike. Good to see your smiling face.
Bless you.
I want to make one comment. I loved the way Nora said, Against All Odds, his latest book, failing to mention that it is in fact my only book, but not like yourself, a very widely published author.
Oh yes, of course. And I see you have a copy next to your.
Is that it there?
Oh, that's it there. What a fine book that is.
What a coincidence.
Writing stories from great contributors.
So yes, to finally answer your question. So I started diving off Adelaide. I did my course in 1979, and I was just saying, I don't recall whether it was my final open water dive to get my ticket or whether it was a couple of dives later on, but fair to say it was very, very early on in my diving life. And I went out with a very famous instructor who pretty much everyone in diving would have heard of, and that is Ron Allam, who a very well-known Australian cave explorer in the 80s, particularly out on the Nullarbor Plain, and then went on to work very closely with Andrew White as one of his kind of technical gurus, helping Andrew make his documentary films. And that relationship led to working with James Cameron, particularly on the Deep Sea Challenger, the submersible that Jim Cameron took to the bottom of the Mariana Trench. So very early on, I was touched by fame, Strike.
Yes,
indeed. However, on this particular day, Ron probably didn't do his best work, because he took us out diving to a little wreck off Adelaide called the Norma, which I think is about 15 metres deep. And it was a February afternoon, quite a warm day. And on the way home from the dive site, we pitch-poled his little tinny, and the bow disappeared into the back of a wave, a following sea. And the backside of the boat appeared in front of me, going over the top of my head, and then we're all in the drink, and we spent the night clinging to the submerged boat until we were found at about 7:30 the next morning. So South Australia is quite well known for great white sharks, and I remember with my legs dangling in that inky black water all night. That was first and foremost in my thoughts. What sort of toothy critters were coming up to nibble on
this
me.
Must have inspired your later sort of interest in rescue and survival.
And safety, yeah. I have to say, I went on to become a very fastidious and safe boat operator thereafter, and especially when I had my own boat in later years. So, so we all learned a lot from that night, and pretty lucky not to, come a cropper from hypothermia or from drowning. But yeah, it was an early lesson.
And so Ron came from South Australia,
Well, I think he might have come from Sydney originally, because he did a lot of exploration in the Jenolan caves, including very famously one of the deepest caves in Australia at that time, which was Mammoth Cave, Slug Lake, where he and another guy dived on open circuit trimix in the 90s, I think, very early, maybe the early 90s, down to about 96 metres. Very extraordinary exploration for that time. So he's got a lot of runs on the board, Ronnie, and amazing technical guy, especially, building all these deep sea camera housings and lights and stuff, and the submarine itself for Cameron.
Well, you're no slouch either when it comes to that. You have that strong, once again, that strong interest in technology and the South Australian connections. We were talking again earlier, the Reg Sprigg diving chamber that you and Ken Smith and the late Bob Ramsey, Peter Costello, sort of spent 4 years or so restoring. And Reg Sprigg, he was another South Australian.
Yeah, well, actually, his autobiography is on that shelf somewhere too, Strike. His biography, I should say. So Reg was a very well-known South Australian geologist, and he explored a lot of Australia primarily for oil, but also for uranium. And he did some amazing things. Like he predicted the Bass Strait oil fields. He predicted a lot of the inland gas and oil fields. He was a partner in the Beach Energy and Santos early explorations and setting up those companies. But most importantly, in a way, two things. One is that he found the Ediacaran fossils in the Flinders Ranges, which this discovery of these fossils of a multicellular marine organism, a bit of a jellyfish-looking sort of thing, he said was the missing link between unicellular bacteria and organisms and living, breathing, crawling creatures. And there'd been that time period missing from the timeline. And so he presented these fossils to the Royal Society in London, and they just laughed him out of the country. He said, bloody colonial, what would you know? It's all ridiculous. And that was all proved to be correct. And so there's this whole time period called the Ediacaran period, described by Reg. So, pretty important work. And the other thing he did was that he built this diving chamber, because in his boat, with his old paper echo sounder, you know, the one with the pen whizzing around,
Yes,
scratching out the line, he found these deep offshore canyons off Kangaroo Island, which he thought were related to the Murray River in an earlier time period, and they were about 200 metres deep. And he decided he wanted to go down there and have a look at them. Now, in early 1960s, that wasn't the sort of thing that a geologist was just able to do, like pop on a mixed gas rebreather and go to 200 metres to check out the canyons. So he asked his workshop foreman to build him some kind of pressure vessel so he could be lowered down there. And so the boys down at Woodville in the workshop got this old boiler and put some legs on it and put a submarine type hatch on the top. And they thought they'd do some testing out in the Gulf down to about 40 metres to start with. And another one of my early influences is actually a one-legged diver called Dave Birchall, who set up the Adelaide Skin Diving Centre. Yeah. He was the kind of test pilot for this. He was a real adventurer and a very early adopter of scuba in South Australia, probably in Australia actually. And so Dave Birchall went down in this thing with an aqualung, and then intentionally flooded the thing down at 20 metres or so and opened the hatch and swam to the surface to prove that, you know, if it all went to custard, that they could safely escape. And then after that, Reg and a marine biologist called Scoresby Shepherd, who's still a living legend in South Australia, and these guys went down and did this huge benthic survey of the Gulf off Adelaide and the Investigator Strait down near Kangaroo Island, down to depths of about 50 metres. One guy in the chamber doing microgravity measurements to look for oil and other voids under the seabed, which they didn't find, but a diver like Scoresby outside doing, sampling sponges and rocks and stuff. And they surveyed this enormous amount of the seabed, which still provides a kind of a baseline for, modern measurements and comparison. So really important work.
And South Australia, of course, is famous for caves. So how did you get into cave diving?
Well, after I started diving in my early teens, natural progression, I guess, when I went to university, to medical school, that I joined the Flinders University Dive Club, which was a really big active club. They had a couple of boats and, well over 100 members. And over the course of my medical degree, I became a dive instructor in that club. And we just started, we ran our courses internally, which was good. And then a few of us were getting a bit bored, thinking, what else can we do? And someone said, why don't we go down to Mount Gambier and have a go at that cave diving? So that's how it started. I hadn't really sorted out. It was just an idea someone had. And so I was always up for something different. So we went down, and I remember it was 1986 and it was July, and there was that horizontal rain and wind that Mount Gambier is famous for in winter and in summer often. And I did this course, and during a cave diving course, as many of the listeners will know, you don't really get to see anything because you either got a blindfold on or your mask is ripped off for most of your time underwater. I came away from it, frozen, waterlogged, and spitting out, algae, thinking, I haven't really seen anything particularly attractive in these sinkholes. So I didn't do very much until about the year 2000, actually. I continued with my ocean diving, but in 2000, a friend suggested that when I was down in that area, I just pop into a sinkhole that belonged to a friend of his. And I just took a single tank, and it was Kilsby sinkhole, which is spectacular. It is, the reason why people take up cave diving. It's 65 metres deep. The sun shines down into this natural entrance. And on a good day, it's just glorious. It has all the things that you look for in a cenote type dive. It's just spectacular. So I did about a 15-metre deep dive there with my single tank, just swimming around, looking at the light show entering this cave. I thought, what the hell have I been doing? This is unbelievable. So I went straight back and repeated my basic cave diving course, which was good because I was hopeless and had forgotten everything. And from that moment on, I've just been obsessed by it, the beauty of these places, and very quickly fell in with a bad crowd, people like Ken Smith and John Delazwana and Craig Challen, who were, Ken and John in particular, extremely experienced cave diving since the 70s. And Craig, started diving quite a bit later than me, but had been cave exploring since the late 90s and done a lot of nullarbor stuff. And so guys like that, Paul Hosey, kind of, I got in with a good bunch of guys basically.
That's where you met Craig, was it?
Yeah, well, not until about 2004 maybe, because I was living in Vanuatu for 2 years and exploring caves over there, 2004, 2005. And I came over to Sydney for Oztech.
Right.
And I met Craig there. And the first time we dived together was actually probably on an expedition that Paul Hosey put together up to the Kimberleys to a cave called Kidja Blue. That was in 2006, and a small group of rebreather divers, and we explored that cave to about 111 meters depth. And Craig and I kind of found this common interest, particularly in deep diving, deep exploration, and that's why I've done a lot of that stuff with Craig subsequently. When
you mentioned that you were on rebreathers then. What was when did you get into rebreathers?
It was quite early on, because John Delazwana and a couple of those guys, a fella from Queensland called Tubby McKenzie, had been working on a conversion of a Dolphin semi-closed rebreather to full closed circuit. And Tubby and JDZ and Chris Law was the other guy, had invented a little needle valve, basically the KISS valve that Gordon Smith went on to invent. And they'd sort of brazed and welded this thing together to leak a bit of oxygen in at the correct rate. And those guys did some big dives on that little rebreather. They did the Bayonet off in the ship's graveyard in Victoria to about 85 meters, I think, and proved that this concept worked. And I remember being in Mount Gambier and JDZ laid out this abomination in front of me, and I thought, oh, it's an anaesthetic machine. It just makes perfect sense to me. It's the same as what I use at work every day. You know, the gas goes round and round. Instead of adding, basically ether or its equivalent. Not that we use that anymore, but instead of adding an anaesthetic gas, we're adding a bit of oxygen and we're getting rid of the CO2 in the same way. And I just thought, oh yeah, I understand that immediately. And I went home and I built one.
Oh, really?
Yeah, because I thought, well, that looks easy. I didn't really understand that there was some issues around that, but I just put one together from, the local hardware parts and a bit of sewing machine work and that sort of thing.
Because at that time, there was a very strong DIY element, wasn't there?
Absolutely. And I love that. I love that about home build rebreathers.
Rebreather group.
And home build groups and all sorts. Yeah, that's it. Yeah. And and that's what I love about cave diving, especially back then as well, because I was just on the cusp when it all went commercial, but I saw enough of the DIY stuff, homemade reels and lights and all that sort of thing. And I really loved that about cave diving. Every cave is different and sometimes requires a unique solution that's just not available off the shelf, and you have to cobble it up yourself. So that really draws me to
the people that you were diving with, the Wet Mules.
Yes. They're a strange bunch.
You started that, all of you are now collectively the Wet Mules.
Yeah, I don't really know how that happened. It was all a bit of a joke. It was Ken Smith's fault, actually, because he used to travel a lot with his work, and he was in some rail siding in a coal town in Midwest in the USA, and he was trying to, there was a bloke in there who operated the siding, I think, and he was chewing tobacco, and he kept trying to get Ken to try some, and Ken, being a proper English gentleman, wanted none of it. So he said, look, I'll try your chewing tobacco if you'll try a cup of my tea. And the bloke said, oh no, thanks. And he would hear nothing further of it. So that was the end of that discussion. But the guide said, well, to travel around the world like this, man, you must have enough money to burn a wet mule. And we thought that's a very apt expression. It really describes exactly what the guy was trying to say. And Ken was telling us this when we were in the Pierce Resurgence one year. And we're thinking, well, we're a bit like wet mules, aren't we? Like, we're always wet and cold, but you have to have quite a strong back to go cave diving and carry all your gear. And you certainly have to be a bit stubborn and maybe a bit stupid. So we said, I think we are the wet mules. And that's kind of how it started. And we were sitting in the airport on the way home, and Craig basically built a website in the airport lounge. And it was just a joke. And it got legs, basically.
Yeah. I mean, that's the Wet Mules are now sort of renowned, aren't they?
Apparently, yeah. I don't know why, but not for anything sensible.
So we mentioned earlier about you sort of clinging to the side of a sunken or an upturned boat, waiting for rescue, and it sort of prompted a interest in safety and survival. You've spent a lot of time sort of looking at survival and indeed developing a course, haven't you? The Australian Sump retrieval course.
Yeah, well, it's called the Sump Rescue Orientation Program, which means it's basically to get people to think about what will happen to them if they get stuck or injured on the wrong side of a sump, which for the wreck divers out there is a water-filled section of a cave. So, if you go out to places like the Nullarbor to Cocklebiddy Cave, you can dive for 6 kilometres out to the end of that cave, but there's 2 places you have to surface and carry equipment across these big rock piles along the way.
Right.
So you go for about 1 kilometre underwater, you get out of the water, carry all your gear across this horrible hill, and then back in the water, another 2.5 kilometres underwater, and repeat if you want to dive in the 3rd sump, and then you do it all on the way home again. And I was out there with Craig and some guys in 2008, which is actually when Craig extended the cave quite significantly, which was an important dive. But we were sitting in Toad Hall, which is the second of these big rock piles. And I'm looking around and, we're carrying tanks across these massive boulders with a sort of 5 metre drop either side. I suddenly thought, if one of us falls over and breaks a leg here, half the people in this country who have been to this place are actually in the cave with us at the moment anyway. Who on earth's going to come and help us? And so that was the thought that started this whole process. So I went home and sort of learning from the Americans in terms of the way they work very closely with the Sheriff's Department in terms of being able to recover bodies and perform rescues if required. I thought we should have some kind of capability in this country as well. So we had a big weekend down at Mount Gambier. We invited the water operations police from South Australia, the local detectives, local emergency services and so forth, and a group of experienced cave divers. And we just ran through a bit of a talk fest and then did a scenario inside one of the caves. And, nearly half drowned the poor guy who was the mock victim in that thing, which, we learned a few things from as well. But we came out of that with a bit of an idea about how we might approach it, and then got online and discovered that there were other people around the world who were doing the same thing. So I set up a bit of a Facebook group called the Sump Rescue Group. And there's guys like Rick Stanton and these fellows from England who are, they're the only ones with any previous experience in this.
Right. And
it just grew from there. So every year I've been trying to run a course for the Cave Divers Association, and the course has become more refined, of course. And I've also been to New South Wales and to New Zealand to run the courses with them. And, it's been a great exchange of ideas with all these different caving communities. And of course, when Thailand happened, we already had an idea of what we might do in this sort of situation. Although Thailand was a bit out of the box, of course, it was a bit different to what we expected.
Yeah. Is that... I mean, that was the epitomisation of teamwork, that particular episode. But you were called in with Craig to take part in it. What actually happened?
Well, how did we get involved?
How did you get involved? And yeah.
Well, we knew Ben Raymonitz already, and we'd done some diving with Ben over in Thailand the year before. And so when I heard in the media that there was this group of kids stuck in the back of a cave in Thailand, I can't remember whether Ben reached out to me or vice versa, but we had some conversations quite early on before the kids were found, in fact, before the British got over there. And Ben was working closely with the Thai Navy SEALs to try and teach them about safety and cave diving, and trying to, do the initial forays into the cave. And he'd found that the amount of water pouring out of the entrance to that place was very formidable and very, very dangerous indeed. And then a few days later, Rick Stanton and John Valanthan from the, the UK cave rescue mob were called over as well by a local British caver who was living in that area. And then I started to converse with those guys as well. And then on day 9, as everyone knows, Rick and John finally laid that last bit of line that they broke through into Chamber 9 where the kids were. And from that point on, everything changed. Of course, suddenly there was a rescue on the go. But in fact, things looked even more desperate at that point. You know, how on earth was anyone going to get these kids from 2.4 kilometres inside the cave through 9 sumps, and some of which were quite tight and restricted and complex, all of which were pretty much zero visibility, and still this powerful river flowing through the place? It just seemed impossible. So Rick had been bouncing ideas around me. I think, a problem shared is a problem halved sort of thing. And because he knew I had an interest in all of this, and I really didn't have much to suggest, to be honest, apart from the fact that I said I'd be happy to come over if they just need another pair of hands. And then on one morning, about 3 days after the kids were found, Rick actually rang me up and said, "What do you think about sedating the kids?" I said, "What? No, it's impossible, forget it. But again, if you want me to come over, maybe I can go to the end of the cave and provide some medical support to the kids while you guys come up with a better plan than that one." And so that's how we got involved. And he said, "All right, well, I'll talk to the local, there was some Australian Federal Police guys and DFAT people on the ground there." So he went off and talked to them, and within half an hour, I had a call from Canberra saying, "Oh, Dr. Harris, we'd like to send you to Thailand. We've come up with this idea." "Oh, very good idea." And I said, that's fine, but I need to bring a friend as well, and gave them Craig's name because I knew he'd be up for an adventure. And they said, "Well, why do you need someone else?" And I said, "Well, if I'm going to do anything medical in the cave, I just need I need a dive buddy, basically, who I can trust and who will kind of keep an eye on navigation and other basics of cave diving whilst I'm thinking about, this other crazy stuff that Stanton's trying to put on me." So that's how it happened that Craig and I both ended up there, and we were on the plane that night.
Straight to the site.
Yeah, overnight to Bangkok, then up to Chiang Rai the next morning.
Right. And then straight into the cave and...
Yeah, pretty much. So we got there on the Friday night. The first thing was to find Rick and John, and by then Jason Mellinson and Chris Jewell, another 2 amazing British cave divers, had joined them. And Jason and Chris were literally sort of walking out of the cave dripping wet as we arrived to chat to John and Rick. So, and Craig actually got his flight was delayed, so he was an hour or 2 behind me. But basically we all ended up just talking that Friday night and going through all the info that the Brits could give us about the cave itself and how hard it was and what the condition of the kids were, what plans were in place and what options were on the table, and then to discuss this idea of sedation. And there was quite a lot of pressure for me to not go and dive the cave the next day, but to come down to the swimming pool and maybe even practice anaesthetising some local kids in the pool to see whether it would work. And the ethics and morality of that, of course, we could debate all night. And there were a lot of very interesting moral dilemmas in this whole rescue, I have to say. But I felt very strongly that I needed to dive the cave myself, first and foremost, because I had to make sure that it was a safe place for me to be in. And also I needed to see the kids for myself and see the lay of the land and just sort of think it all through for another day. Problem was the pressure of time was enormous because the forecast was saying that the rain would come back and probably set in for the monsoon within 3 to 4 days. So we really had very little time. So to waste a day like that was a really difficult decision, but I just felt it was the right thing for me. And it turned out to be a good idea because, the cave was indeed pretty sporty, and it was important to see those kids for myself and explain what we were thinking. So it was the right call.
And were you very hopeful of the successful outcome?
It's fair to say I had 0% confidence that any of those kids could come out alive doing, the sedation plan. And the only reason we ended up doing that was because there was literally no other option. If we had not given that a go, it would have meant basically leaving them there for the period of the monsoon, which means they would have died of starvation and infection or exposure. So yeah, it was a difficult decision. That's for sure.
And in terms of the sedating them, what information did you have to call on? What previous sort of knowledge?
Yep. So in 1942, a physiologist called Edgar Pask, a British guy in the British Royal Air Force, was asked by the Air Force to prove that the Mae West life jackets that the pilots were wearing in their Spitfires would work if they were unconscious and ditched in the English Channel. So Edgar, being a smart fella, said, well, the only way to test it is to get them some airmen in the swimming pool with their Mae Wests on and get them to pretend to be unconscious. But he wasn't convinced by their unconsciousness. He said, you guys, you're not really unconscious, so I don't really know whether this is working or not. So Edgar had himself anaesthetized and intubated and thrown in the pool in a life jacket and floated around genuinely unconscious, and repeated that about 7 times, I think, until he was convinced that the life jackets worked.
Wow.
Now,
he ended up convinced.
Yeah, he had the courage of his convictions, old Edgar.
Yeah.
And he ended up in hospital with half a swimming pool in his lungs a couple of times, I believe, but he survived. And then he did the same to a bunch of airmen as well, air crews. So, there was no informed consent in World War II, I suspect, if you're an RAF boy. Anyway, so the proudest thing that's happened to me subsequently, I might say, is that I received the Edgar Pask citation from the Association of Anaesthetists of Great Britain and Ireland, which was really lovely. So that's the only precedent for someone being unconscious.
How did you find out about that, Harry?
I learned about Edgar during my anaesthetics training, because there's a bit of anaesthetic equipment, a bit of tubing, which he designed to be long enough from the anaesthetic machine to him, so that he could, he needed about a 7-meter long piece of tubing so that he could be, because he couldn't have the anaesthetic machine in the pool with him. So, so there's this piece of tubing that he designed, and I just was always fascinated by that story and the courage of the man who had to test that theory. So when I knew about Edgar, and I knew of no one else who had ever been anaesthetized and in the water. And so when I received that award, I was really chuffed. It was great.
And how did you, all of a sudden you had to get all of the appropriate sort of materials and chemicals and drugs and whatever?
Well, that was no problem, because I had the Thai Army Medical Corps at my disposal pretty much. So I had a lot of conversations with their anaesthetists, psychiatrists, paediatricians. I was talking to all these professors from Bangkok on the phone, trying to convince them that my idea, which I had no faith in whatsoever, had some merit. And so I said to them, I'm very open to suggestions if you've got any better ideas. And they went very quiet at that point. So, I guess that was permission to go ahead in their silence.
And sorry, when communicating with them from the cave, or did you swim backwards? This was on that, probably on the Saturday night that I had all these meetings, when we had formulated a bit of a plan, or formulated the anaesthetic side of the plan in my mind, and the Brits and everyone else involved had agreed on where the divers were going to be and how it was all going to work out. So I had to convince the medical community, and then we took that information into a very big meeting with high sort of level government and military people. This was late into the night on Saturday night. I ended up about 2 a.m, I think, and after being in the cave for 10 hours, and then presenting this to all these people, and they said, righto, you guys go to bed, and we'll see you in the morning, and we'll tell you in the morning whether you have permission to go ahead. So for the rest of that night, I got the Thai doctors and nurses to prepare all the anaesthetic drugs for me, so they'd all be ready for the morning if we went ahead. Wow.
Wasn't much sleep that night.
You then sort of stayed in the cave, sort of seeing all of the kids out. So you were
only day by day. I came out at the end of each day.
Right.
because I needed a few hours sleep to function again the next day.
Mhm.
And yeah, so we'd go in at about 9 or 10 in the morning, come out at about 8 or 9 that night, having
How
done
long does it take to traverse?
about 3 hours,
Right.
hours. Yeah. So long days. And then, yeah, and then, you know, 4 kids on the first day, 4 kids on the second day, and then 4 plus the coach on the third day.
It was a wonderful achievement. Sadly, of course, your father passed away while you were away.
Yeah, just on the last day, actually, probably the timing worked out that pretty much as the last boy appeared out of the cave, he died back in Adelaide. So I found out that late that night when I finally had time to ring my wife, Fiona, and, you know, check in and tell her all the good news. And she patiently listened to that while I sort of got all that off my chest. And then she had to tell me that terrible news at the end of the day. So it was, yeah, that was a bit of a blow, and obviously pretty mixed emotions that night, you know, after this extraordinary event that we all predicted would go completely badly, and it was 100% successful. Then to hear that news was a bit of a kick in the guts. But you know what, and I've said this numerous times now, but, you know, Dad died at the age of 88. He had had an amazing life. He was a great father, a tremendous bloke, very well loved by everyone who knew him. And he just, you know, popped his clogs about a week after he went into a nursing home, which he was pissed off about. He was really cross that he had to go into a home. And so for me, I couldn't be happier for him in a way. You know, it was a great exit for a great bloke. So, you know, I was only feeling sorry for myself. So I just decided to celebrate his life and the amazing thing that had just happened in Thailand. And so we stayed on in Thailand for a few days and really kicked up our heels. It was good.
I can imagine, but and he would have been keeping sort of track or aware of what you were doing. And
yeah, my sisters and my wife were popping in each day with, you know, newspaper clippings and telling him what was going on. And he just thought that, you know, I was off on some other adventure, and, you know, he was starting to lose his memory a bit, but I think he grasped that there was something pretty significant happening. He was always very proud of me, so it was good.
I was going to say he would have been enormously proud of you.
Yeah. Although he hated me cave diving. We would always have this sort of running joke. Every time I'd see him, now, you're going to give that cave diving away? And I'd go, you know what? I think I will. I think I'm done with it. And he'd go, really? And then he'd go, yeah, scallywag.
Because it's one of the interesting things that I found reading your story about the cocklebiddy in the book. And I'm sorry, I'm going to have to plug this time divers book, but Harry's recipe and story. Harry's recipe, first of all, it starts like a Mrs. Beaton's cookbook. The chugged hare. Except in his case, it was venison. It's first catch your deer. But having done that, his story, and he starts by saying it's really Craig Challen's story, most memorable dive. And I think that's
I didn't have my own story.
Sort of player, but the story of going into Cocklebiddy Cave further than anyone else, and then being required to wait by yourself in the dark while Craig went on further ahead through a small little hole in the water-filled tunnel. And you're waiting there. You went to sleep, you said.
Yeah, I know. That was an underwater sleep, which scared the life out of me. I'm pretty sure I had at least 5 minutes sleep, because suddenly I noticed 15 minutes had gone past and I'd had my eyes closed, and I went, oh, it's probably not really that smart to be asleep, 6 kilometres from the entrance of a cave underwater on a rebreather, waiting for your mate. What if he came out and he left without me and I didn't notice because I was asleep? I was very tired. It was a long day.
That itself was the most amazing sort of story. But a lot of what you've done, it hasn't always been in caves either, has it? It's You went with Lee Bishop and co diving the Niagara, the gold ship Niagara off New Zealand, and made some great discoveries there.
I mean, I find shipwrecks incredibly exciting, especially, you know, new wrecks or unplundered wrecks. To see everything where it is in situ on the wrecks is an extraordinary experience. And even more so if they're a bit deep and not many people can get to them, like Niagara and many of those sort of wrecks. So, yeah, and hanging out with blokes like Bishop and you know, Craig Challam's equally accomplished wreck diver. Craig Howell is an amazing wreck diver. He's not doing so much now. But being away with those blokes, Dave Appley, you know, they're extraordinary guys. And yeah, I was way out of my depth doing those early deep wreck dives from my point of view. It was a very steep learning curve, and I still get quite frightened doing deep wrecks. I find it a much more dangerous environment than caves. There's so much that's beyond your control, particularly with, you know, relying on the blokes on the top in the boat and the change in weather over, you know, 5 to 10 hours of decompression. You know, it's so unpredictable.
So the Niagara is lying at what sort of depth?
That's 120 meters, that one.
Okay. And now the Pierce Resurgence Cave, how deep did you say?
That's 245 meters.
Right.
And but the cave, but you know, the weather can go to shit on the surface, Dave, and there's no waves or anything. There's no sharks on Deco. There's really nothing much can go wrong except in here. You know, it's all all about what's going on in your head when it comes to cave diving, I think.
But that particular wreck, you managed to recover the ship's bell, the Niagara.
Yeah, well, that was Craig Howell, who I was lucky enough to be buddied up with. And Craig had been chatting to Keith Gordon, the keeper of the wreck, a bit of an old scallywag in New Zealand, him and Dave Moran, who you would know. And Keith, so I saw Craig Howell sneak over to Keith and say, well, if I was looking for the bell, where would it be? And Keith said, well, you go to the foremast and you go up, and because it's on its side, so you go along the sand until you get to the crow's nest. I'd look around there. Anyway, Howell, you know, he's dived wrecks all over the world. He said, you just follow me, Harris. So I'm swimming along with him, and he was, you know, we were like this, you know, he was only about a metre in front of me. And we go along the deck. Oh, there's this big mast. Off we go. Oh, there's the crow's nest. And I look down onto the thing at the same time, pretty much as he does. And I suddenly hear him screaming. And there's the bell sitting perfectly on the sand, right where Keith said it would be. And how no one else like Pete Mesley or Appley or those guys had missed it, I don't know. But anyway, there it was. And so me and Craig tie our lift back on with a little note for Keith Gordon saying Merry Christmas and send it up. As it was. And I think it's in the museum in Auckland now.
Right.
So
and there's still some bars of gold down there, aren't there?
Well,
supposedly.
Yeah. I reckon Keith Gordon's got them in his garage somewhere under a bit of concrete, you know, waiting for a rainy day. But yeah, there could be 4 or 5 bars there somewhere, but it's been pretty well looked at by some keener eyes than me.
So moving from wrecks, just back to the caves again. You've dived caves literally all over the world, haven't you? In China, Vanuatu, of course, Florida. Wow.
Not Mexico, Bahamas. Some of them, I mean, they are probably the prettiest caves in the world with Brian Cape.
Bahamas?
Oh, they're glorious, yeah. So I've been lucky to do a couple of trips there. China cave diving was amazing. The water's filthy. I'm not sure whether it's just runoff or sediment or what it is, but the visibility is very poor, which makes them hard to explore, but they're all very deep. A lot of them just go straight down like an elevator shaft, like that cave Dajing Spring, which, as I say, we went to 213 meters in and there's no sign of it stopping. You just sort of hit your button and, you know, just go, oh, that's enough, stop. So they're amazing caves, and I'd love to go back there.
And what is there to find in them?
Oh, more wet rocks, you know, it's just...
wet rocks. But fossils, for example, South Australia, you find the fossils.
Yeah, I mean, the more cave diving I do, the more interesting I find the science. You know, you start to look at the rock when you start to understand a bit more about it. And I find the biology really interesting, all these little creatures that are swimming around in these very nutrient poor ecosystems and hostile environments. You know, there's no light. Sometimes it's freezing cold or very hot. There's sometimes the air chambers are full of hydrogen sulfide or CO2, and there's all these bugs scuttling around. It's kind of weird and amazing at the same time.
And they're still unknown to science, a lot of them.
Very easy to find. You know, if you want to discover new things, caves is definitely the place to go. Dry and flooded caves, all sorts of interesting stuff. And you hang around with all these different scientists. You know, as cave divers, we often become the eyes and ears for these scientists, and they say, look, we want a piece of a stalactite to do climate change studies on, looking for CO2, or we want you to try and catch a shrimp that looks like this because, you know, the DNA of this shrimp might connect to the DNA of the thing in the Bahamas, or you know, improve the theory of Gondwana land and all this sort of stuff. There's really interesting science to be done. And yeah, I just love it.
So where do you want to go next?
Well, how long have you got? There's, I mean, there's caves in every country in the world, I'm sure. And, you know, I haven't been to Africa, or we were talking about the possibilities for India, for the cast over there. I'd love to go back to China, all sorts of Pacific Island caves.
And you have that interest in photography as well, filmmaking now, documentary sort of filmmaking. So you've done a lot of, or taken part or contributed to a lot of documentaries as well, haven't you?
Yeah, I've done a few bits and pieces, but you know, this latest thing with the, you know, the Thai cave and subsequently the Australian of the Year has opened a few doors and presented some opportunities which I'm really trying to take advantage of. So I'm very keen on working on some documentary ideas of my own, and I've been working hard to pitch those over the last couple of years, and starting to get a bit of traction there now, although the virus has put some of those things on ice for a while. But some of the ideas are looking like they might come to fruition. So hopefully that will be a bit of a career change for me soon.
Yeah. And I saw as I say, I saw on Facebook your new Nauticam camera with more buttons than that on it.
More buttons and more pixels. That's what you need.
Yeah. Yeah. So you're going to give that a whirl now.
Yeah, I'm off to Mount Gambier tomorrow.
You did some filming for cave diving for Sanctum, didn't you?
Yeah, I was up on the set in Queensland with a lot of, you know, really great cave divers like Agnes Milauka and Dave Appley and Barry Holland and a few others. So we were lucky enough to work on that set, and most of those guys had jobs as stunt doubles, but they said I was too fat to be a stunt double, Dave. So I kind of accept that.
I'm sorry, you're not right. What?
Well, they said I was, because, you know, you had to be a body double for these skinny little actors, and there were none of the actors were my shape, apparently. So anyway, I got over that. But so my role was rebreather technician, changing all those people's scrubbers for them and that sort of thing. Set underwater doctor, which was never required. But then I did get a little gig as taking the underwater video for the behind the scenes video. So when you watch when you get the DVD and you look at the little added extras, you see a bit of underwater stuff of
the photographer,
you know, how we made the movie. That's me. That's yeah.
Wow. See,
very exciting job.
Advantages being slightly Viking god-sized.
Exactly. Yeah. So no, I've done a few little filming jobs for little documentaries and, you know, 60 Minutes and those sorts of things over the years. Yeah. But yeah, not ready to retire on that yet.
I think that's wonderful. So you're doing underwater filming as well in Mount Gambier?
Well, this weekend, just to give this new camera rig a bit of a try.
Right.
But this is just a regular weekend
away. That's part
away.
of the documentaries, is it, that you were talking about?
No, this is just a bit of a test weekend.
Right.
But yeah, the documentary I'm working on is based around cave exploration around different sites around the world. So I've got a couple of production partners who see some value in my ideas. So we'll see where it goes.
And just to go back a bit, early on, you said that you put together your own sort of initial rebreather. You've moved on, obviously, since then, and you don't make your own anymore, I take it.
No, but we do continue to modify them a fair bit for what we want to do.
Right.
So I've owned quite a few different rebreathers over the years since then. Started out with the KISS Classic, which you could buy in the early 2000s. You could buy it as a kit and then assemble it yourself. And I think that's the way KISS got around some of the the training and CE requirements of, we're not selling you a rebreather, we're just selling you some pipes and O-rings, and what you do with it's up to you, kind of thing. So that, that was a great way for me to start, because I'd already proved the concept to myself. And whilst I wouldn't recommend for a moment that people go down that path and kind of DIY rebreather training like some of us did, then I think that's very foolish in retrospect, but somehow I got away with that, and subsequently went on to do some rebreather courses, you'll be happy to know. But I've never been completely sold on any one particular brand of rebreather, because I don't think there is such a thing as a perfect unit. And for every different type of dive we do, I find there's a different rebreather that seems to work better for that dive. So I've used side mount rebreathers, little chest mount rebreathers, little homemade decompression rebreathers, quite a few different back mount, electronic, manual. Craig was the first one to put together 2 Megalodon rebreathers, which I've copied to do our very deep dives, because we need a bailout rebreather option.
Right.
So yeah, we've got lots and lots of different approaches to rebreather diving.
And this is when you say the particularly deep ones, so would be like the Pierce Resurgence?
Yeah, I think anything over 150 metres, we feel that that's the sort of realm where a second rebreather really starts to pay dividends, which is offset very much by the complexity and failure modes of having such a monstrous device on your back. And they're unwieldy, nasty things to dive. It's not relaxing in any way, and it takes quite a lot of preparation, as you can imagine, a lot of checking and a lot of practice to get all the loop volumes right and the buoyancy problems that come with them, and how you bail out and how you do all this. So it's been a very slow learning process for us, and that's why we've crept quite incrementally down into the depths of this cave over 13 years now to get to the depths we're at. And it's not just the rebreather systems we're using, it's also all the support systems like the habitats and the support divers and the crew. And yeah, it's a complex exercise now.
Those habitats sound fascinating. That, once again, we were talking about prior to coming live. That's really is fascinating. And obviously a lot of hard work getting them in there.
Yeah, well, these dives are stretching out to 15 to 19 hours now, and the water is only 6 degrees, so clearly you can't spend that time in the water. Yeah. Even with the best dry suits we've worked out, the undergarments, the heating, all the rest of it, 4 hours plus you're starting to get uncomfortable. And 4 to 5 hours is pretty much my limit. A couple of our team have done 7.5 hours in the water. That's way beyond what I'm able to do comfortably. So yeah, we've got to get out of the water, and at least from the belly button upwards. And the best way to do that is to climb out of the water into a box full of air, and that's what the habitat is basically. So initially, Dave Appley, who was exploring this cave, had a habitat at 7 metres, just one of these intermediate bulk containers, a big white box inside that steel cage. And he cut the top off, flipped it upside down and tied it down with some ropes and filled it up with air, and climbed out of the water and sat in it for a couple of hours at the end of his dive. And he could breathe 100% oxygen from the surface in there and do his deco. And that was fine until the dive started to get towards 7 or 8 hours. And then we thought, well, what about a second habitat down at about 16 metres? So we can, do a couple of hours in there. And that's how it's progressed. And now we've got 4 habitats that we install in the cave when we arrive. So the deepest one's at 40 metres, and it takes about 4.5 hours to get to there from the bottom. So about 4 hours of deco in the water back to 40 metres. And that's where the deco really starts. And then up to the next one at 28 metres, then to 16 metres, and then finally at 7 metres.
Okay.
So,
and you have to take, you remove them at the end of each expedition?
Yeah, so it takes about a week to set the cave up and get diving. So it's a 2-week trip,
Wow.
usually camping in this valley in New Zealand. Everything goes in by helicopter. There's about 12 loads often in the helicopter, underslung with cargo nets, maybe 2 or 3 tons of equipment, compressors, generators, you know, big tent for communal tent and all the rest of it, food and a few beers. So it's it's a big undertaking.
Expensive business as well.
Well, we're saved by the fact that we're camping and cooking our own food. So actually, it turns out to be about $5,000 each, which for a 2-week holiday in New Zealand is actually not too unreasonable.
Yeah.
But most of that money is spent on the flights, the shipping, and the helicopter.
Right.
Yeah.
And talking of the helicopter, of course, you were in the retrieval, doing the Hewitt. You had to do a Hewitt, helicopter underwater escape training and retrieval from helicopters.
Yeah, so I worked for about 7 years with the South Australian Ambulance Retrieval Service. Basically taking critical care medicine to the roadside or to small country clinics or hospitals. So if you found yourself, you know, mangled in a car crash or chomped by a shark or, you know, having a heart attack somewhere remote, then we send this little team of a doctor and a nurse or a doctor and a paramedic out to those sorts of incidents, and we might drive there if it's close by, or we might fly in the helicopter, or we might use one of the flying doctor planes to get us out to these places. So covering the whole of South Australia, basically. So quite a busy job. And yeah, provided a lot of interesting opportunities for practicing medicine and anaesthesia in some pretty bizarre places at times. You know, at night in a ditch with an overturned car in the rain, that sort of thing, or you know, in a shed on a farm somewhere, or, you know, all those sorts of things, basically providing intensive care style medicine. So that was pretty good training for something like Thailand, I have to say.
It would have been, yeah. You've led a fairly exciting sort of life.
Well, I get bored easily, Dave. That's the problem.
Now, I do have to ask as well, after the cave rescue, you were rightfully received an enormous number of honours. How do you wear them all?
Well, apart from having this book over here in pride of place, I also have a shelf where I can just put them all. So yeah, I don't. It's all been very strange, Dave. I have to say the whole experience was quite bizarre. Returning to this madness after coming back from Thailand, I can honestly tell you that Craig and I were in Thailand just doing this thing that we had this training and ability and skill to do, and it was a huge privilege to be part of that big team. But we had no idea what a big thing it was outside of Thailand. We just thought we'd come back and the government would probably send us a letter saying, thanks for giving up your holidays and going to Thailand to help those people. And we'd get a letter and that would be the end of it, kind of thing. It was overwhelming, the amount of attention. And for the first few months, I actually completely hid away from it all. I just thought, I just want to go back to work. I want this all to be normal again. Yeah. And then we get this invitation to go to Canberra to receive these awards, and then the South Australian and Western Australian of the Year thing. And I was starting to think this is all getting a bit out of hand. And then when we were announced as Australians of the Year, well, there was nowhere to hide after that. And to be honest, it would have been quite churlish to do so. I think we felt a strong obligation to, you know, speak about what had happened and, you know, try and do something good with that award, which has been a fantastic opportunity and experience for me. And you have done a lot as well, and continue to do a lot. You know, I know that you sort of help out with the Our World Underwater Scholar Society. You're a strong supporter of that. All of the various things that you do help out, where you speak. Yeah. Well, you know, something like an event like this can make and this applies to me, can make you realise that you've led a fairly selfish existence. You know, all these amazing adventures and opportunities I've had have, in a way, been quite selfish. You know, it's all been not for the betterment of mankind, I would say, but for the interest of Richard Harris. And, you know, I was suddenly reminded by the Australian of the Year award in particular, when you look at the other people who are nominated for those awards, and they've spent their lives, you know, combating some social injustice or, you know, advocating for some amazing cause, you think, what have I been doing? And so, shit, I better get off my ass and, you know, give something back. And so getting involved with a few charities and so forth has been brilliant. It's been great for me, and it's a really great chance to, you know, feel like you're contributing a bit. So I've been loving it.
So it was a wonderfully enlightening experience.
It has been overall. Once the shock wore off.
Yeah. Mate, there's a question from Miko.
That Miko.
Yeah.
I don't trust him.
He's in the next edition of Dining with Divers, by the way.
I know.
And Miko asked, Harry, how did you guys set up the internet connection in the habitats?
Well, Miko, we don't have an internet connection in the habitats. That you're probably thinking of the little video that we record, which we sort of have this thing called International Habby Chat, where we talk to a GoPro camera in the habitat to our friends in Florida who do the same back to us again. So yeah, no internet connection, just pre-recorded. The magic of television. Hope you're doing well out there, Miko.
He didn't respond.
No, well, he would be well. He's a fine man.
Nora, how are we going for time?
We could have a couple more minutes if there's any question. Yeah, plus maybe another 5 to 10 minutes. How about that? Because I'm enjoying this conversation, especially with the habitats, though. That's quite interesting, especially with habitat.
So, Harry, we can carry on. We have
permission. We have permission from Nora.
When you were over in, you were seeing Brian over in the Bahamas.
Yeah, Brian's such a great bloke, Brian K. Cook, and I've been very lucky to go and visit him twice and have a swim with him in the crystal caves of Abaco Island, which, you know, for any cave diver out there who hasn't been, it's an expensive trip and it's hard to get to, but it is mind-blowing. It's a once-in-a-lifetime experience to swim through these. It's actually the most stressful cave diving you can do because the places are so intensely decorated with incredibly fragile crystals. You're living in this paranoid state of hyper-awareness where you don't want to touch anything or break anything, and, you know, just to preserve the beauty of these places. They're very fragile. But Brian's a very good guide, and if you're a clumsy bastard, he basically won't take you anywhere nice. But it'll still be the best cave diving you've ever done. And if you've kind of got the hang of it after a few days, he'll start to show you some extraordinary stuff. So, and he's such a nice guy to dive with as well. He's great. So,
and then you did an expedition to Christmas Island as well with
yeah, that was with Brian and Jill Hyneth and famous Professor Tom Iliffe, the godfather of all cave creatures. His interest is in stygofauna, as we call them, and in particular a little thing called a remipede, which is a tiny little centipede-like thing that swims through the water, and it's white, it's lost all its pigment, it's got no eyes, but under the microscope it's got these monstrous fangs and venom apparatus. And he says that if that creature was the size of a cat, it would be the most dangerous animal on the planet. So they're the sort of apex predator of the microscopic life forms in there. So fascinating people to dive with. And we were looking for remipedes on that island, but unfortunately didn't find any.
Oh, very sad.
But, not so sad. It was all right.
Yeah. And you were also in the UK at one stage, you said.
Yeah, I went caving. Big mistake. Never go caving with Rick Stanton and those guys, Duncan Price, because the caves are ferociously cold and wet, and the British don't seem to worry about that. Whereas I've rapidly come to the conclusion that I don't really like dry caving very much, but I especially don't like wet dry caving and cold wet dry caving especially. So I like my caves to be like a swimming pool with little steps that you can walk up to and just pop in, rather than crawling around on ropes and things. I find it I'm not suited to any gravity-related sort of activities.
And I should have asked, of course, as a cave diver, do you also enjoy dry caving?
No, I've just said how horrible it is.
It's cave diving.
I only go caving to get to the water. It's a necessary punishment that's required at times. Look, I do enjoy it. I do enjoy going up and down ropes and things, but I have no natural aptitude for it. You know, I'm not one of those skinny spider monkeys who revels in that.
No, if you can't be a body double on sanctum.
Exactly. I find underwater I become very graceful, like a manatee. And that's where I'm best suited. I like the fact that you can walk just with your fingers in the cave when you're underwater. It's very little energy expenditure. I can just about put on weight while I'm cave diving, I reckon.
Really? Well, you're obviously very relaxed. If you can fall asleep 6 kilometers up a cave passage. Yep. That's relaxed. Harry, thank you so much for joining us. It really has been absolutely delightful. And you know, in terms of the honours and recognition that you received for the cave rescue, you're a most deserving person. Well, both you and Craig and everyone involved, most deserving person though. And it's been an absolute delight sort of chatting with you. And of course, I do look forward to COVID being over and catching up in person at some stage and sharing a beer with you.
Well, that would be very nice. Now, did we discuss my fee for appearing this evening at all?
I think it was a beer, wasn't it?
Well, that'll be fine. I'll hold you to it.
It'll be my pleasure, mate.
Excellent. Well, thank you both, and hope everyone enjoyed the chat.
Thank you. Nora.
Yes, thank you so much, David and Strikey, and also I don't know, do I call you Harris or do I call you Harry? I think this is a very entertaining conversation session, I must say. And thank you both for your evening to share with the ADEX community. And I'm sure that we all enjoyed very much. But before I end off, there's a few hellos from the Facebook session itself. We have, of course, Pete Mesley. Pete says hi, and
now I'm sorry, I do have to cut across.
Yeah,
Harry, when people can travel again, you have to come to Singapore to the ADEX show, and you have to join us in the hunt for the fortune-telling parrot.
That would be no problem.
Yep. You join Pete Mesley.
Would he be involved? Well, they're pirates, those blokes.
Yeah, David Street, all of these wonderful people.
Excellent.
Sorry, Nora, back to you.
No worries. There's always the adventure with the fortune-telling parrots, and even I am very interested because as a local, I've not even tried it, and and to have Strikey trying it sounds so fun. So we do have David Street as well. He said hello, and he totally enjoyed his interview, and of course Miko Pasi as well. And we do have some highs and hellos from Alan Killets and a couple more people. So yeah, so thank you so much once again. We can't wait to actually meet you guys in person in ADEX 2021 next year. And yeah, and I don't know, maybe you'll hopefully be able to converse in person and hear all those amazing stories that that you've been sharing throughout today, especially the cave. I'm very interested to know more about it.
Very good. Thank you, Nora.
Yeah.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you, everyone, for watching, and I hope to catch you soon.
See you later. Thank you.
Thank you. Did we just leave now?